Hi there, Dawn McVey here with Paper Tray Ink. Today I thought we'd talk about stamping double backgrounds on your projects. It's a great way to get more mileage out of those background stamps because you can create some really unique custom backgrounds by layering them up. So hopefully by the end of today's video we'll have you looking at those background stamps in a whole new way.
Okay, so let's get started. Here's a card and a gift tag that I made not long ago with a friend of mine that demonstrates kind of what we're talking about today, which is creating a double background where you layer two stamps one over the top of the other. In this case, I layered Polka Dot Basics 2 first and then topped it with Background Basics newsprint. In order to achieve that really soft, subtle look, and yet it looks really sort of uniform, I use the same ink for both stamps. However, on the polka dots, I stamped them off first on scratch paper so that they would be a little bit lighter when I stamped them on the cardstock. And that way, when I stamped the newsprint over the top using the same ink, it would be a little bit brighter so that the two wouldn't sort of blend together. I wanted you to really be able to see that there are two different stamps on the background. So that's kind of the idea of what we're going for today. There are lots of different background patterns that you could stamp one over the top of the other, whether it's actual background stamps or whether you just use a flower or something like that out of a regular stamp set. You can create backgrounds out of just about anything. The thing you'll just want to be careful of is how well do those stamps layer over the top of one another. And you're kind of going to need to experiment a little bit to see if you like the way it looks when you stamp one over the top of another. The other thing you're going to want to be careful of is how well do the ink colors that you're using look when stamped over the top of each other. A good rule of thumb I like to go by is either using, like I did on this card where I use the same color, that's Berry Sorbet ink, for both background patterns, or you can use two colors that are in the same color family, like maybe a lighter yellow and a darker yellow, or maybe even a yellow and an orange. That way you just get kind of a uniform background pattern that looks pretty without detracting from the focal point. You don't want your background to stand out kind of more than the focal point, because then that sort of defeats the purpose of the focal point. So anyway, for today, I thought we would use regular polka dots. This is Polka Dot Basics. This stamp set is well loved and has been well used over the years. This is some rustic cream cardstock, and I've got this kind of slightly larger dot pattern from this set that I'm going to start out with. When stamping background patterns, I always like to start at the bottom. That way you can use the bottom edge of the cardstock as a guide for lining things up. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp this all the way up over the entire card front. Okay, so I made a slight little change here. I decided to go ahead and trim this down a little bit so that once we get the entire background stamped, it's going to be a little bit busy. It will be subtle in terms of color, but I wanted to give a little bit of a solid edge around this background pattern just to give your eye sort of a place to rest. So the next thing I've got here is, this is a stamp from Background Basics Sheet Music. Sheet Music is another one that I think layers really well over and under a lot of other patterns. And I'm using some Hawaiian Shores ink. Hawaiian Shores and Aqua Mist are obviously in the same color family, and so they layer really well together. I'm just going to leave a little bit of space here and stamp again. And I'm going to do that up the entire cardstock. Okay, so now that that's done, we're going to go ahead and adhere this background pattern to the front of our card. And like I said, it's a busy background in terms of the pattern, but the color still keeps it nice and sort of neutral. Not neutral, but neutral in the sense that it's not going to take away from our overall focal point. And by giving it a little bit of a border, it breaks up the busyness just a little bit. So it makes it a little less sort of overpowering. So we're going to set that aside for now and move on to our focal point. And for this, I've got my Delightful Dahlia Edition stamp set. I can't seem to stop using this set. I love it so much. I've die cut a flower and 3 leaves. These are the small flower and the small leaf from the set. And I talked about this on my blog, but I'll give you a quick tip. The die cut and stamp, as you can see here, there's kind of an extra little V there in that one particular spot on the flower. That is what I consider the bottom of the flower. You can do it however you want, but just for purposes of lining these stamps up, I used that as the bottom, and then I got my stamp, spun it around till I had that V at the bottom, and then I put a little, can you see the little Sharpie dot on the back side of my stamp? So it doesn't affect the stamping at all, but that way I know that that's the top. And then I did the same with the shading images. The first time you stamp them, you'll need to spin it around a little bit till you figure out exactly where the top is. But then I just put that little black dot on there. So now every time I pull them out, it's super easy to find where's the top of the stamp. And I know where the bottom is on the die cut, so it's easy to line them up each time. So I am going to stamp this flower first in Hawaiian Shores ink. I also get a lot of questions on how I clean my stamps. I just use a regular wet wipe from Target. They're the Up and Up store brand. And I stamp it, or I wipe it off with a wet wipe, and then I go ahead and stamp it on some scratch paper just to make sure I get any wet wipe residue off. And then the stamp is clean and ready to go right back in the case. I always do that immediately once I'm done with that particular ink color. So now I'm going to move on to some greens. I've got New Leaf ink here. I'm going to use for the next shading image. Another good little trick is once you know where the top is, and this will help you find the top the first time, there's kind of a long skinny petal right over here. That one is a really good, it's just a good one to use to try and get things lined up the first time. And then anytime after that, that long one, even with the shading images, that's what I'm looking for when I am trying to line things up. Once that's in place, then you just have to rotate it just slightly to make sure you can see the little white lines all the way around each of the petals. Oops, and then you're good to go. So we'll stamp that one more time with the last of the shading images. Again, I've got my black dot at the top of the stamp, so I know right how to put it on the block. And this is some ripe avocado ink. Again, I'm looking for that sort of long, skinny petal on the side there. Perfect. And now we're going to do some leaves. Now I did this technique on another card for the countdown on the leaves, and I loved how it turned out. So I'm going to do it again today, and I will show you what I mean. I'm using New Leaf on both layers, both the solid image and the shading layer, but I'm going to stamp them off once first onto some scratch paper and then stamp it on the die cut. It's soft and subtle, and we'll still achieve shading by adding the second layer and doing it the exact same way. But the nice thing that this does is it really allows the flower to pop because the leaves are so subtle. I especially like to do this in cases where I've used green on the flower itself. That way the green on the flower doesn't just sort of blend in with the green on the leaves. If I do these nice soft subtle leaves, the flower can really shine. So now that the leaves are done, the last bit of stamping we need to do is a little bit of a focal point where we will put those leaves in the flower. So I've used the Matte Stack 6 die to die cut the frame here. I'm going to grab one of the frames from the Matte Stack 6 collection stamp set. We're going to use this one here. So I'm going to ink that up with Smoky Shadow ink. And then I'm going to use the rectangle image that's meant to fit right inside that frame. I'm going to stamp that with New Leaf. Since we've got a lot of aqua happening on the card, I'm going to use the green here to kind of bring that back in a little bit more. And lastly, I made kind of a fun discovery, the Boutique Borders birthday stamp set. This long, skinny birthday image fits just perfectly inside this frame. I'm going to stamp it in Smoky Shadow also, but I'm going to move it kind of up to toward the top of that frame a little bit, just because I'm going to be putting the flowers right underneath it. And if I scooch it up a little, that'll give me just a little bit more room for my flowers. So we are done with all the stamping, and now we're going to go ahead and assemble everything. Okay, so I've got everything adhered, and the last thing I want to do is just add a little rhinestone, gemstone, right to the center of the flower, and there you have it. A really fun double background.
I hope you've enjoyed today's project. I can't wait to see your take on the challenge. If you'd like to play along, be sure to head over to Nicole Hetty's blog, where you can leave a link to your project so we can all see what you came up with. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day. This has been Dawn McVey with Make It Monday.